Deebo Samuel has officially been traded to the Washington Commanders, so we're going to talk about this trade for both sides in today's video. This really does feel like the end of an era for the 49ers. Since 2019, Deebo's rookie year, ever since he got there, this team has really been a juggernaut. His rookie year, they went to the Super Bowl. I know they lost, but it felt like they never really looked back after that. 2020 was kind of a weird year. Jimmy G was hurt, but after that, they just went on to go to countless NFC championship games. They got to another Super Bowl, obviously, last year, and it's not like they were getting blown out in those Super Bowl games. They were really competitive and close games. So for me, this kind of feels like the first step for the 49ers as they're kind of entering the next rendition of their team. I feel like this team we saw from 2019 to 2024, that was such a dominating team for most of those years. Obviously, they did have down years like in 2020. They had the down year this past year in 24 with all their injuries. But for the most part, over the past couple of years, this Niners team has been a juggernaut within the NFC. And I feel like Deebo Samuel was an integral piece of this 49ers team for what he did for not only from his leadership perspective within the locker room, obviously that means a lot, but also just what he meant for this team on the field. He was such an integral piece to this team being so successful, and I think that's one of the big reasons. There were multiple reasons why the 49ers had a disappointing year this past year, but one of the biggest reasons, I think, is because Deebo Samuel was not the same player. So this move tells me, we know Deebo Samuel requested a trade, but we know he wasn't the same player. So I think that the 49ers kind of acknowledged that. They knew it was time to move on from this guy who meant so much to the team. So for me, it is this move does kind of signify a big, maybe a philosophy change within the Niners organization, where they're now going forward, they're acknowledging that it's time to move on past this team that it's been for so long, especially after this past year with all the injuries. I could see this 49ers team looking a lot different in a couple of years with a lot of these, a lot of their vets are either injury prone or just getting old, Christian McCaffrey played like 3 games this year and didn't look good in any of them. He's probably on his way out. Trent Williams is like 36, 37 years old. He's on the way out. George Kittle I like, but I don't know how many good years he has left. He's starting to get up near 30. The defense had a bunch of injury problems this past year, and there's the big question of Brock Purdy's contract. Brock Purdy is someone who, it's reported Brock Purdy wants upwards of $50 to $55 million annually, which for me, I'd really struggle giving a guy like Deebo that. And a good comparison I bring up in that debate is, when a quarterback gets paid that amount of money, that limits the team from a roster perspective, what they're able to do, the players they're able to put around their quarterback whenever they deal out that kind of money. And so the case I use is, let's take a look at the Bengals, a team with a top 5 quarterback, arguably top 3, depending on how you feel about Burrow. But we all know Burrow, one of the best players in the National Football League. He took the money, and look at how that impacted the Bengals roster. You can definitely nitpick the Bengals and criticize them on some of the players that they chose to leave their team. But it's clear Joe Burrow taking that money limited the Bengals from a roster perspective, and they've gotten worse. And ever since then, they've struggled to make the playoffs with a top 5 quarterback. That's with Joe Burrow, a legit superstar quarterback. He took the money, and even he is struggling to get into the playoffs now because of the limitations to his team, because of his money. So you're telling me a guy like Brock Purdy, who's nowhere fucking close to Joe Burrow, you're going to give him a Joe Burrow level contract and he's going to be able to get into the playoffs? I don't think so. So I have some major reservations about this 49ers team going forward, like the things we just brought up. And I think that the Deebo trade signals that Niners management kind of knows they're going into, I don't necessarily want to call it a rebuilding phase, because I know Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, if you ask them, they'd laugh at you if you'd say, are you entering a rebuilding phase? But I think there are certain realities to building a team, and a guy like Deebo coming off a disappointing year at that age, making that amount of money, I think they just said, you know what? I think we just need to cut our losses. And I saw a lot of 49ers fans just happy at the simple fact they were able to get off of Deebo's money. They didn't really care that the return wasn't that great. They were just happy that they were off the books for paying Deebo Samuel, whatever. I don't know exactly how much Deebo's owed. I want to say something like 18 mil that the Commanders obviously are now fully going to absorb. But yeah, I do think that this plays into a bigger narrative about the 49ers going forward, because when you just look at this objectively, this was a bad return for Deebo Samuel. A fifth round pick for Deebo, I think, is really bad. And I get it. He's coming off a disappointing year, but even then, I still think this is a bad return. Just a couple years ago, like not that long ago, we're talking about maybe 3 years, which I know in the NFL, 3 years is kind of a big deal, especially for a guy like Deebo who plays such a physical style. There's wear and tear on his body. But just like 3 years ago, whenever he was battling with the Niners to get his new contract, there were reports that they could have gotten like multiple firsts. There were teams, I know the Jets were one of them, that would have given like significant multiple high-end picks to land Deebo, and then they wait just a couple years later and trade him away, and he's only fetching a fifth-round pick. Wow. I mean, it just shows you how quickly things change in the NFL, because if you go back just 1 year ago from today, Deebo Samuel was viewed as one of the most valuable pieces to this team and one of the most unique players in the league. He was a big reason why they were in the Super Bowl last year. And for just a year later, for him to go for only a fifth-round pick, to me, it has a lot of implications to it. I know the easy part is to just say, well, look at his stats. But I think it's more complicated than just look at his stats. I think you have to also factor in all the other stuff we just talked about, with the roster getting older, with the Brock Purdy contract coming up, with the Niners potentially entering a new era of their team. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say about that for the 49ers perspective on this, because flat out a fifth-round pick for Deebo, even this version of Deebo, which is not the Deebo we're accustomed to, is a bad return, because a fifth round pick nowadays is not what a fifth round pick used to mean. You used to be able to get like decent starters still in the fifth round. That's not really the case. Obviously, there's always going to be your diamond in the rough type players, but the odds, I think, are so much lower now with NIL, with college. These kids would rather just stay in college and collect the money instead of going into the draft. So, these drafts are not going to be as deep going forward as they were in years prior, because, if they just stay at college another year, they're guaranteed, especially if they're a starter. Starting college players on like real teams make like $800K. So if that's me, why would I risk going to the NFL, where if you're a fifth round pick, your contract's not guaranteed? You could be cut. There's no guarantee you make the team. Whereas if I just stay another year in college, I'm guaranteed $800K. If I'm on a good program, I'm gonna be getting good exposure, and I could potentially go higher in next year's draft. So a fifth round pick is essentially nothing. Like the depth of these drafts is gonna be bad. So it's a bad return, I think, especially given the upside of what Deebo could be. And you could look at this. I'm not saying that this is the case. It's just an argument I'm presenting. Is you could say that maybe it was just a down year for the Niners team as a whole. I think that's a really fair argument to make when you look at the collection of injuries they had. Am I trying to give Deebo Samuel a pardon? Am I giving him a pass for his bad play this year? No. But I think you could make the case that this was a 49ers problem, not a Deebo Samuel problem, because the whole team was out of whack the entire fucking season. So this could have been a case of this guy struggled, but the whole fucking team struggled. So yeah, his numbers aren't going to look the same. So now we can look at it from Washington's perspective. I think it's a really good trade. People out there are saying Deebo's washed. Why would they go out there and waste a pick on him? Well, number one, like I just said, fifth round picks aren't as valuable as people seem to think they are. The depth of these classes are not what they used to be. And number two, there's a good chance Deebo bounces back. I still think that there is something left in the tank for Deebo Samuel, given his versatility and given the fact that the Niners were such a mess on offense this past year that I think it's a really reasonable thing to say that Deebo Samuel could bounce back in Washington, who right now, they seem to be a much better ran organization, which is kind of fucking crazy to think. Think about saying that just a year ago, saying that the Commanders have a better situation than the 49ers. Everyone would have laughed at you, but that's what happens when you get a franchise quarterback in Jayden Daniels. and how good that offense looked, Deebo's not going to be the focal point on this team. It's going to be Jaden, it's going to be Scary Terry, and then Deebo, you got there as kind of just a cherry on top for this team. And I think he could be a really valuable gadget player within this team, ran by a guy on offense who knows what he's doing in Cliff Kingsbury. I was really critical of him as a head coach, but as a coordinator, it's clear he just had one of the best coordinator seasons we've seen in a while to resurrect that team. So you put Deebo into that this collection of talent that they're starting to put together in Washington, and they gave up nothing. They didn't give up anything of value. It'd be one thing if they gave up a player or like a third-round pick, then I could see you maybe arguing they reached too much. A fifth-round pick is nothing. Like, they gave up nothing. It's such a low risk for a high reward. And even if Deebo is only a Commander for 1 year, who gives a fuck, I always tend to favor these teams that are aggressive whenever their quarterback, they find their good young quarterback who's on their rookie deal, and they go all in. They push all their chips in the middle of the table. Russell Wilson won his Super Bowl because Seattle found their guy at QB and went all in on him while he was on his rookie deal. The same fucking thing happened with Patrick Mahomes. He won the Super Bowl on his rookie deal. This past offseason, we saw Houston try to do this with C.J. Stroud. They found their young stud on his rookie deal. They went out and they signed all these big-name free agents, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, Danielle Hunter. So now we're seeing Washington start to do it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to do this in the offseason, where they just add in the draft, trades, all of that. Just, we found our guy. He's on his rookie deal. We're going to have our best shot with this guy while he's making no money. Obviously, he's making money, but relative to what star quarterbacks make, I think Jaden makes like $7-8 million a year, as opposed to making whatever the fuck he's going to get, $60 million a year probably by the time he's up for his contract. So I love the move for Washington because it shows me that they're being bold. They're not just standing by their laurels and going, oh, well, next year we're just going to improve. No, they see how much success they had this past year, and they're adding to that. They know that their window for getting a Super Bowl is right now with Jaden on his rookie deal. So that you need to go out there and take these big risks and go out there and get a guy who could really change your offense in Deebo Samuel. And the other bonus of this from a play perspective is you don't need to rely on Deebo as like your number one receiver. That's Terry. Terry, this past year, proved that he's an elite number one receiver who you can reliably, play after play, count on to get open and make big plays. Terry McLaurin is that level. He's a superstar level player. Whereas I feel like the problem with the 49ers in years prior is sometimes they would rely on Deebo to be their number one receiver, and that's just not really the best role for Deebo. That's why they paid Ayuk so much, because they're like, okay, well, maybe Ayuk can be the clear number one guy. Deebo's more of a gadget player, more so than he is just a true number one receiver that can go out and get open on routes. That's not how Deebo plays. And there were Chiefs players after that Super Bowl 58 last year in Vegas. The Chiefs players were saying, or I don't know if it was the players or the staff members, but people affiliated with the Chiefs were like, yeah, Deebo, we're not gonna hone in on Deebo. Like, he's not gonna get open on us. So I think that is another underrated component of this trade, is the fact that they're not bringing Deebo into Washington to be their number one possession receiver that they're going to be turning to play after play. He's just a gadget guy. He's a little extra on top to go along with Scary Terry and Jaden and their pass game. So I really like this trade for Washington. As for the 49ers, I get why they did it. They didn't want to pay Deebo going forward, coming off a disappointing year, but the return they got, I think, was bad. And you could say, Deebo's washed, so just the fact they got off his contract, that's fair, but I think that just remains to be seen. I think Deebo is going to be a productive player with the Washington Commanders, but that's just my opinion. Let me know your opinion down in the comments. If you made it this far in the video, appreciate you listening to me. Please like and subscribe.